This is exactly what I want from a book inspired by Dracula. Hi everyone, my name is Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading, and thank you so much for joining me for the start of this vlog. I do not read a lot of horror, so spooky season is a little bit different for me. It's always a little bit different. However, I do love Dracula. Dracula is actually one of my favorite classics of all time. So yes, it is a horror, but it's a gothic horror that I really, really love. I tend to love vampire books in general, so this should not be shocking. But Dracula, like I said, one of my favorite classics of all time, if not my favorite. So in this vlog, I am going to be reading 3 Dracula-inspired books because I love Dracula. So in theory, I'm going to love books inspired by Dracula. What I'm going to start off with first is going to be Dracula's Guest. This is a short story anthology of vampire stories, again, based around Dracula and various things of that nature. I don't know how many stories are in here, but it's a pretty good size anthology. One of my goals for this year was to get into reading more short story collections. I have not done the best at doing that goal, but I've read a couple this year, and this is going to be the next one that I read. I don't know that much about each story other than that they are all vampire tales. I do love a good vampire. I love Dracula, so I'm sure some of these short stories are going to be right up my alley. I don't know if I'm going to read this in its entirety before I start the next book in this vlog, or if I read a couple of short stories, pick up another book. It just depends on how I'm vibing with it. We'll see how it goes. You'll know because in the next clip, you'll know what I've decided because it will be the future. So I finished part 1 of Dracula's Guest. This is really interesting because it has these really older vampire stories. I believe part 1 is mostly set stories that are written around the 1800s. So they're definitely older. These are like classic vampire stories that maybe you haven't heard of, but like have influenced the current vampire stories of today. I really feel like the editor has done so much work in putting in little tidbits before every story or after the story to kind of explain what was going on in the times, why people believe vampires were like that, a little bit about the author of this short story, and really gives some great context to each story. And I'm really glad that's in there because I think it really brings a lot to the stories. I thankfully do have the audiobook for this because where the stories are older, they definitely read more like classics. And I just feel like I do better with that kind of material when I have an audiobook. And I definitely want to kind of slowly work my way through this just because, like I said, it is a little bit older literature. It takes a little bit more brain power to follow along because the language is a little bit different because it is older English. And just the writing style is a little bit different. So I just want to kind of take my time through this. So now that I finished part 1, I'm going to move on to the next book in this vlog and just kind of take a little bit of a break and then come back and read part 2 when I finish with that. The next book in this vlog that I'm currently reading is going to be The Dowry of Blood. This is a BookTube favorite. People love this book. It is a very short book. It's only like a 5-hour audiobook. I have it on Kindle and I also have the audiobook through my library. This follows one of Dracula's brides, and that's really all I know about it. I think it's Constanza, but don't quote me on that. I probably said that wrong. I'll know how to say it after I listen to the audiobook. But it follows one of Dracula's brides. That's the premise of this book. I know so many people who love this book, and I really hope I love it. Since I love Dracula, I have really high hopes for this book as well. So I'm going to dive into this one next, and then I'll check in with you, and then I'll head back into this after I've had a little bit of a break with a little bit more modern literature. But I am enjoying this one. It's just something that I want to kind of move through kind of slowly. I finished The Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson last night, very, very, very late. I got off Sprints with Brie at like midnight. I had about 15 to 20 minutes left of the audiobook. So I just kind of like finished it while I was getting ready for bed. So it was very, very late. And this follows Constanza, and that is the name we know for this bride of Dracula. It does say that she had a name prior to being a bride of Dracula, but it's never mentioned in the book. So I'm just going to call her Constanza. And basically, she is a young woman who is brutally injured in a war. And she is left for dead by the people who have basically killed her family, killed her village, brutalized everyone. She is left for dead. And Dracula finds her
and makes her into a vampire and his bride. And we follow their entire life together, which is hundreds of years, and we see them go through various places of living, various towns, various other people coming into their family, other brides, etc. And we see them as they go through that relationship. Obviously, Dracula has been a vampire for a very, very long time and has a way of wanting to do things. He's very controlling. He wants it done his way. And we see kind of Constanza first fall in line with Dracula, and then we see her kind of decide that maybe this isn't the life that she wants. At the very beginning of the book, like in the first couple of pages, we find out Dracula has been killed. And we see that she's looking back over their lives and telling us this story. The writing was really beautiful. I really loved the prose in this book. I found it very atmospheric, and it really made you just like dive in and fall down this like rabbit hole of vampires. And I didn't really want to come out of it. This book totally could have been longer. And when I put it into Goodreads, I noticed that there's a sequel coming out next year, and I'm very excited about that. Definitely will be pre-ordering that. Looks like it follows Carmilla, which is very exciting. And yeah, I'm gonna need to continue that. I did give this 4 stars. I really did enjoy it, and I think it's a really kind of neat, almost sequel to Dracula, even though it's not, but it's a spin-off of parts of Dracula that like I wanted to know more about. So I think the author did a really great job of keeping to the original source material while expanding on this kind of universe with the Brides of Dracula. I am now going to go back to the short story collection and read part 2. That's my plans for the day. I forgot to bring it over with me. It's sitting over there, so you know what I'm talking about. You've seen it in this vlog already. But I'm going to read part 2 on sprints later today. I have sprints for 7 hours today, so I should be able to get a good amount of that done, if not the whole thing. It would be nice to do the whole thing today on sprints, but we'll see. It depends on how many distractions I get, but I'll get a good portion of it done, if not the whole thing.
So I was only going to read part 2 of this, then come back and talk with you, and then read part 3. However, when I finished part 2, I realized there was only 4 stories left. Part 3 was very, very short. So I just finished the book. At the beginning, I was liking part 2 a lot more because the authors were slightly more current. They were more written around the exact same time as Dracula. So certainly still classical feeling, not like current as of today, but the writing felt more familiar and it had the feel of Dracula and really just kind of hit that for me a little bit better. But as with a lot of short story collections, there were certainly some stories I liked better and some that I liked not as much. And after a while, because some of them are very, very short, they started to kind of blend into each other. A lot of them were quite short, and also a lot of them were very similar. And after a while, my brain started to be like, oh, was that this story or this story? Have we switched stories? My brain was like melding it all together, and it was definitely having some trouble keeping it separate. However, I still did like this book, and at the very end, the last story in this book is a Bram Stoker short story, which was a fun surprise to find him in this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was a good short story collection. My favorite part was definitely the bit that the editor put in before each story to give it context, to let us know about the authors, because obviously you may not have heard of a lot of these authors, and I think the context really brought a lot to the short stories. I just found this maybe a bit too long, and some of the shorter short stories, I don't know if they were necessarily necessary to be in here, because like I said, some of them were very short, and it just made it seem like we were repeating the same story after a while. Anyway, we're gonna move on to the last book for this vlog, and I'm gonna grab that really quickly. The last book I'm going to be reading for this vlog is Dracula, which is written by Dracula Stoker and J.D. Barker. And if you don't know, Dracula Stoker is actually the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. So how perfect is that it's continuing on in the family with the story that kind of made his great-grand uncle famous? That is this story. This story is actually following, I believe, Bram Stoker. Like it's an historical fiction around the writing of the story of Dracula. It is chunky. It is long. It is a 16-hour audiobook. So it's going to take me a moment. I'm going to get started with it. I'm very excited for this one. Out of all 3 books, I think this was the one I was most excited for. Although I was excited for all 3, and I was definitely excited to read The Dowry of Blood. This one, I think, because it's such like a relation to the Dracula story, I'm really excited to be picking this up. I'm going to get started on this chunky tome, and I will give you more of a synopsis of this book once I've read a little bit of it. But from what I can remember, it follows Bram Stoker writing Dracula.
So late last night, I got to 50% of Dracula, and I'm not going to lie, this has all the 5-star vibes. It's probably going to be 5 stars. It would have to go off the rails at this point to not be 5 stars. This is exactly what I want from a book inspired by Dracula. And honestly, the writing style is different, but also kind of the same, which is really interesting since I know it's partially written by a descendant of Bram Stoker. So that's kind of interesting. It definitely hits all the vibes of Dracula while giving us a brand new story. So this follows Bram Stoker and his family. His sister Matilda is a big player in this book, as well as his brother Thornby, and his other family members do play a part, but they are smaller. When Bram is a small child, around the age of 8 and under, Bram is suffering from an illness. No one really knows what's wrong with Bram. He's very sick. They're nervous he might die. He's a very ill child. His uncle comes to basically bleed him. It is the 1800s. That's how they handled illness then, with leeches. And Bram does not want this to happen again, but his family is determined that this is the best course. His uncle is a doctor, and that's what they're going to do. They also have a nanny in their home, and it's Nanny Ellen. And Nanny Ellen has come to them since Bram was basically born. Right before Bram was born, Nanny Ellen came into their lives. And she is a young 20-something girl, but she is taking care of all these little ones. But she goes away about once a month on a trip. She comes back and finds them bleeding Bram. She is very upset that this is happening. And she basically shuns everybody out of the room and sits with Bram, and something happens while that is happening to Bram that is around Nanny Ellen, and it basically heals Bram from his illness. Because of what's happened, Bram doesn't really 100% know. He had a very high fever at the time, and he's not really sure what's happened. Matilda is a bit concerned that Nanny Ellen kind of looks different at times. There's a lot of mystery around Nanny Ellen, and they start to suspect that potentially Nanny Ellen is a vampire. And we follow Bram Stoker, Matilda, and like I said, their brother Thornby throughout their lives while they're kind of looking into who is Nanny Ellen. And also, does this suspicion of Nanny Ellen as a small child and what Bram kind of remembers from this time with this horrific fever, does it influence his writing of Dracula later in life? This gives you all the vibes of Dracula, and it has the perfect amount of content while also being slightly creepy. And I'm really enjoying it, and I want to get back to it. I actually need to finish this today because this vlog is supposed to go up in 2 days, and I need a day to edit it. So I have to finish this today. I'm also getting my hair cut today because it's getting very long. So I think in the next clip, you will see that I have finished this, but I may also look kind of different because I will probably have had my hair cut. So I will see you later today when I finish that, get my hair cut. Hopefully I can get them both done today. I'll definitely be getting the haircut done. The goal is to also finish this because like I said, this needs to go up in 2 days and I need to finish this vlog. So it is time to close out this vlog. I did end up finishing Dracula yesterday, but didn't end up coming to tell you about it. So I did finish this. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think from that middle book wrap up, that's not super shocking. I really did enjoy this book. I really felt like it captured the spirit of Dracula while following a different aspect of it, which is the kind of influences in Bram Stoker's life that led to it. In the original prologue, which is talked about in the author's note of this book, Bram Stoker says this is a true story. What this book has done is taken that prologue where he says this is real and made it so that it was. Showed things in Bram Stoker's young life, in his childhood, in his 20s, that would lead you to believe that he actually met vampires and had kind of creepy instances with vampires, some scary influences. His family has had run-ins with vampires, and that's what led to him writing Dracula. That is what this book has done. That's what it really wanted to do. It wanted to make you think that Bram Stoker had happenings with vampires. That Dracula was real, that Dracula's brides were real, that this was all true. This book is almost 500 pages long. It is a 16-hour audiobook. Did I find it a bit long at times? There was probably times where it dragged. Did that hurt my enjoyment of the book or make me want to score it any less than 5 stars? No, it did not. Realistically, it could have been a little shorter, but I loved this book so much that it had to get 5 stars. It was such a fun kind of look at Bram Stoker's life. It's called like the prequel to Dracula. That's kind of what they wanted to make, was a prequel to the story. The explanation of where Dracula came from. And I think they did a great job of writing a fictional story that kind of leans into what if Bram Stoker actually met vampires. So that is the end of this vlog. And if we have learned nothing from this vlog and just my love of Dracula and stories similar to it, is that it's not that I don't love horror. I do love gothic horror. So if you have any gothic horror recommendations, put them down below. I may end up doing a video reading more gothic horror coming up maybe next spooky season, because I do really like gothic horror. I always say I don't like horror, but that's not completely true because I've loved all of these books. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.